It began on a stormy night, the kind that makes you want to stay inside, tucked into a cozy blanket while holding a warm drink. But fate had other plans. Lena had not been intended to be here. She wasn't meant to take this way home. Something, an unexplainable feeling, caused her to turn left instead of right that night. Story comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Rain hammered against her windshield as she drove through the empty streets. The streetlights blinked on and off, creating creepy shadows everywhere on the sidewalk. She clutched the steering wheel harder, anxious to get home. But then she saw it. At first, it seemed little more than a wet cardboard box sitting in the alley next to an old gas station. But then she heard it, a faint whimper. It was so weak, so fragile she nearly thought she had imagined it. But as she slowed down, lowering her window for just enough light for listening, above the sound of the storm it came back. Another whimper. Her heart clenched. She stopped the car, ignoring the rain that drenched her as she climbed out. But as she drew near, her stomach twisted with a queasy feeling. Someone had deliberately left the box here. And inside, wet to the bone, barely alive, was one little, white, helpless puppy. For its age, it had been smaller than it should have been. Its fur was thin, clinging to a frail little body. It appeared as if it hadn't eaten in days. But though it made no protest, at the moment Lena reached, it forced a head up, its eyes, so dark, so deep, fixed on hers. And then she saw it. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. A mark, a dark, unnaturally precise mark on the puppy's skin, just below where its ribs ended. It wasn't a scar. It wasn't a burn. It wasn't random. It was too perfect. Too deliberate. Lena's pulse quickened. What was this? Had someone hurt the puppy like this? Or was it something that the world was not meant to see? A shiver ran down her spine. She had seen her share of abandoned animals. But this was different. Without hesitation, she scooped up the puppy, cradling it in her arms against her chest. It was so cold, so fragile. It could hardly muster the strength to crawl. "I've got you," she whispered, not sure if the little creation could even hear her. She ran to her car, mind whirling. She knew precisely where she had to go. There was a 24-hour veterinary clinic a few blocks away. Little did she know that, within the next few hours, she'd be listening to something that would alter everything she knew about this world. Lena's car skidded to a stop outside the emergency vet clinic. The neon sign was barely legible with this heavy rain. She wasted no time, opening the door and running in with the littlest puppy still bundled tightly in her jacket. The receptionist, a young man with bleary eyes, looked up, startled. "Please," Lena spluttered with a trembling voice. "I've got this puppy. He's freezing. He's weak. I don't know how long he's been out there." The receptionist nodded, already reaching for a button on the desk. Within moments, Dr. Harris, the clinic's chief veterinarian, emerged from the rear. He looked to be in his late 50s, the white coat slightly wrinkled from what was probably an exhausting night shift already. But when he spotted Lena with the puppy, he didn't think twice. "Bring him in." Lena trailed him down the hall, panting. It was a small room, bright, sterile, and clinical. The air smelled of antiseptic and the slightest traces of wet fur. She carefully set the puppy down on the metal examination table. Dr. Harris wasted no time. With practiced hands, he palpated the puppy's fragile body, looking for injuries, for evidence of dehydration, malnutrition. The puppy whimpered but didn't fight the man. It was not strong enough to resist it. Lena swallowed hard. He was abandoned, in a box, in the rain," she said, her voice shaking. Dr. Harris nodded slightly but offered no response. He continued his examination, testing the puppy's heart, its paws, its eyes. Then, as he turned the little creature onto its side, he froze. Lena noticed her breathing seemed to hitch in her throat. Because Dr. Harris was not getting up, he had his eyes fixed on one thing, the mark. The same strange, unnatural-looking sign that Lena had found earlier. But the look the vet gave it was like he knew it. For the first time since arriving, a twinge of unease washed over her. "What is it?" she whispered. Dr. Harris paused before answering. He bent closer, stroking his finger across the mark, but she could feel him tracing its odd, purposeful shape. It wasn't raised, it wasn't a scar. It was something else. And then, something even weirder happened. When the doctor touched the mark, the puppy made a sound Lena had never heard before. It wasn't a whimper. It wasn't a cry. It was almost a hum. A low, vibrating sound that sent a shiver down Lena's spine. Dr. Harris jerked his hand away immediately, paling face. This is not normal," he said under his breath. Lena's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The vet stepped back and raked a hand through his graying hair. His face was a mask, and yet Lena could see it. There was something wrong. Then Dr. Harris, finally, after a long pause, turned to her and said, "I need to run some tests, right now." Lena's pulse quickened. "What's wrong with him?" she demanded. Dr. Harris exhaled sharply and looked at her with some serious concern. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'll tell you this." He looked back at the small, frail being on the exam table. "This is no ordinary puppy." Lena's hands were sweaty as she sat in the chilly waiting room of the veterinary clinic. The beige walls did nothing to calm the rising tension in her chest. For the last half hour, she had been fixated on the closed door to the examination room. 30 agonizing minutes. She had given the puppy to Dr. Harris, who had taken it for immediate testing. But his reaction, how his whole attitude had shifted, sent a shiver of anxiety coursing through her. What had he seen? What was the matter with this puppy? Before she could even gather her thoughts, the door finally creaked open. A doctor then stepped out, clipboard in hand. His face was blank, but Lena sensed it. Something was wrong. "Come with me," he said, his voice calm but firm. Lena's heart raced as she trailed him into the examination room. The puppy lay on the table, swaddled in a soft towel, its small chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. It seemed so peaceful, so normal. But the tension hanging in the air told her differently. Dr. Harris sighed, running the back of his neck before setting the clipboard down. "I conducted a battery of tests," he said. "Blood work, X-rays, a full-body scan." Lena swallowed hard. "And?" He paused for a beat and then said something that turned her heart to stone. "This puppy has no medical records, no microchip, no identifiable breed." Lena blinked. "What do you mean? He's obviously a dog." Dr. Harris gave a serious look at her. "Is he?" The room fell silent. Lena's fingers clutched the edge of the table. "What are you trying to say?" The vet took a deep breath. "I checked his DNA." He tapped the clipboard. "And I compared it against our system's database of known dog breeds." Lena felt her stomach twist. "There's no match," he added. "Nothing. Not even a partial genetic relationship to any registered canine species." Lena's mind reeled. "That's impossible." Dr. Harris nodded. "It should be. But then here's where it gets weirder." He leafed through the papers on his clipboard and pointed to one of the scans. Lena leaned in and froze. On the X-ray, there was an unmistakable picture of the puppy's tiny frame. But something was off. Its bone structure. It wasn't like any average puppy she'd ever met. There were extra joints where there should never be. Its rib cage was unlike any she'd seen before. It was long and bent just a bit unnaturally. And then there was the mark. It wasn't just on its skin. The X-ray revealed that whatever this mark had been, it ran deeper than the surface. It had been incorporated into the actual fabric of the puppy's body, almost like it wasn't just a birthmark, but something that had always been there. Lena felt her breath hitch. What? What does this mean? Dr. Harris gazed at her, his face inscrutable. I don't know, he confessed, but I do know this. He passed a quick glance at the small, fragile being lying on the table. This is not your average puppy. And now, I'm beginning to wonder. He was never supposed to be found. Lena's world was spinning. She hadn't been in the vet clinic an hour when she had walked in, thinking she was doing the right thing, rescuing a helpless, abandoned puppy. But now, she was looking at an X-ray that wasn't supposed to exist, a puppy without any medical records, no breed identification, a strange mark that creased not just its fur but its very bones. And the words of Dr. Harris kept ringing in her ear. I'm beginning to think he was never meant to be found. Lena blinked hard, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. And it doesn't make sense, she said in a whisper. Dr. Harris folded his arms, frowning in thought. I've been a veterinarian for more than 30 years. I've seen animals by the thousands, but I have never seen anything like this. Lena looked down at the small creature on the table. Now, its breathing slow and steady, it looked so peaceful, normal. But she knew better. Nothing about this was normal whatsoever. And then, like the cold fist against her life, a memory hit. A memory she hadn't recalled in years. She gasped. Her hand automatically fluttered to her wrist, right above a barely visible scar she'd almost forgotten existed. Dr. Harris saw a shift in her expression. Lena, what is it? Her heart pounded. This mark, she whispered, her voice a thin thread. I've seen it before. Dr. Harris's eyes narrowed. Where? Lena hesitated. Is it possible she remembers this right? Or was her mind simply playing tricks on her? With a shaky exhale, she made herself speak. When I was a kid, for a few years I lived with my grandparents. Well, they had a big farm, a lot of land. One summer a dog came to me out of the woods. It had been hurt, like this puppy. And on its side, right above its ribs, she turned slowly to Dr. Harris, her voice a whisper. It had the same exact mark. The room went silent. Dr. Harris looked at her, his mind evidently racing. Are you sure? Lena nodded. Her fingers, trembling, traced the faint scar on her wrist. I remember because I tried to touch the mark. And when I did, she swallowed hard. The dog bit me. Dr. Harris's eyes widened. Lena took a shaky breath. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't scared. Like, she paused, searching for the words, like it was telling me not to touch it. The room filled with a deep, unsettling sensation. Dr. Harris glanced back down at the sleeping puppy. So, this isn't the first animal with this mark to come out either, he muttered. Lena hugged herself, suddenly cold. No, but back then, the dog went missing. One day it was there, and the next day it was gone. Dr. Harris shared a glance with her. This was no longer just some odd little puppy. This was something bigger that Lena had been unknowingly linked to for years. And she had a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. Finding this puppy wasn't a coincidence. Somebody or something wanted her to find it, and that terrified her. Lena walked out of the veterinary clinic feeling as if the ground under her had shifted. The storm was over, but the air was still thick, electric with something unseen. The cold wind nipped at her skin as she strode toward her car, cradling the puppy against her chest. She was here seeking answers. Now she had more questions than ever. Dr. Harris agreed. They would continue to run tests, continue to dig deeper into the strange anomaly that this tiny puppy was. But Lena also knew. This had never been about science. This was something bigger, something that she was not meant to comprehend. And, as she buckled herself in and twisted the key in the ignition, an odd sense crawled up her spine. She wasn't alone. Her gaze darted to the rearview mirror, scanning the dark parking lot. Nothing. Just lines of silent cars, streetlights murmuring in the dark. She took a breath and shook her head. Get a grip, Lena. But when she reached the road, driving home, it lingered. In fact, it grew stronger. When a small apartment on the outskirts of town became available, in a quiet little neighborhood with darker streets and the rare stray cat that wandered its sidewalk, she took it on. Usually, she craved the stillness, but tonight, it felt suffocating. She had just parked outside her building and was turning to grab the door handle when she noticed it. A dark SUV was parked across the street. The engine was running, the windows tinted. Lena frowned. She didn't recognize it. And yet, she had a nagging sense that she had seen it before. A flash of memory hit her. Days ago, when she first went the wrong way that brought her to discovering the puppy. That same SUV was parked nearby. Coincidence? Or had someone been watching her all along? Her heartbeat quickened. She had to pretend everything was fine, getting out of the car and locking it behind her. But her ears had been trained. They listened for any sound. Nothing. She ran up the steps to her apartment, shaking keys in her hands as she unlocked her door. The moment she was inside, she secured it behind her. Breathe. She turned on the lights and carefully set the puppy on the couch. It frowned a little, but stayed asleep, its small chest rising and falling with regularity. She should rest. She needed rest. But she couldn't stop her mind from racing. What was this puppy? Why was its mark so familiar? And if so, what did they not want her to find out? Her phone buzzed. She nearly jumped. She took it out, hoping for a message from Dr. Harris, but instead, no caller ID. A freezing shiver crept down her spine. She held her thumb over the screen. Answer or don't. It buzzed again. Taking a deep breath, she swiped to agree. Silence. Then, a gravelly, distorted voice crackled on the speaker. You could have left it there. Lena's blood ran cold. Before she could react, the call ended, and outside her window in the dim light of the streetlight, the black SUV was gone. Lena's phone almost fell from her shaking hands. You could have left it there. The words swirled in her skull, encircling her like a chill spell she could not lift. Her breath was shallow. Her heart beat so loudly she could hear it in her ears. This was more than a dumb prank call. Someone knew. Someone was watching her. Gradually, she craned her head to the window. The street outside was empty. The black SUV was gone, disappeared as if it had never existed. But she knew better. Someone was making it all happen behind the scenes. And the worst part, she had no idea who or why. The puppy awoke on the couch, giving a soft, sleepy whine. The noise broke Lena out of her unusable cycle of fear. She had to focus. She couldn't let fear rule her, not with something bigger going on. With caution, she cradled the minuscule creature in her arms. Now it was warm. small body rising and falling in a deep, steady breath. He had no idea how much chaos he had wrought on her life in a matter of hours. And yet, she could not bring herself to regret discovering it, because somewhere deep down she knew this was no mistake. This puppy had entered her life for a reason, and she was going to discover why. She draped the little brown blanket around him and laid the pup on her bed. Then she grabbed her laptop. If that someone was trying to scare her off, that meant there was something to hide, and she was going to discover what. Her fingers raced over the computer's keys, hunting for anything, any hint of a reason, behind the unusual mark on the puppy's body. She began with dogs with birthmarks. Nothing matched. Next, she looked for rare genetic mutations. Still nothing. Finally, she typed in unusual animal markings. And that was when something stuck out. An out-of-focus, monochrome image. It was old, very old. The edges of the image were ragged, and the quality was poor, but she could still make out what it contained. A dog, not just any dog. It had the same exact mark. A frigid chill traveled down her spine. The article was written in a language she didn't recognize, but through an online translator she was able to pick out a few words. Her eyes widened. Found in 1953. Mysterious disappearance. No explanation. Her pulse quickened. What the hell was this? Before she could read any further, a loud bang echoed outside. Lena's head shot up, her heart almost stopping. It was coming from her front door. A knock. Not a knock. A single, heavy pound. She went still, her throat constricted with a hitch of a sob. Someone was outside. A buzz in her lap, her phone. She glanced down. No caller ID. Again. Her stomach twisted. She pressed decline with a shaking hand. She waited. Silence. Then, a second pound on the door. Lena's blood ran cold. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Lena's entire body froze, and the silence after the knock was deafening. Suddenly, the air in her apartment felt too thick, too heavy. Whoever it was out there wasn't just an ordinary visitor. They were here for the puppy. She knew it. She felt it. Another pound on the door. This time, louder. Lena's fists clenched, and she could hear her pulse thumping in her ears. Her gaze moved to the small puppy curled up on her bed, sleeping peacefully and unaware of the threat waiting a few feet away. What was she supposed to do? Her phone buzzed again. No caller ID. Lena felt her stomach knot up. She didn't dare answer. And then a chilling thought came to her. Her laptop. She had just discovered that old article, the one graced by the same mysterious mark. Was someone tracking her searches? Was this all connected? She needed to act. Now, her gaze skittered toward the front door. She stepped back, mind whirling. Option 1, ignore it. Act like she wasn't home. Option 2, dial the police but lose precious seconds. Option 3, open the door and face what was waiting for her. A voice, low and calm, broke the silence. Miss Carter. Lena's breath hitched. The person on the other side of that door knew her name. This wasn't random. It was personal. A long pause. Then the voice spoke again. We need to talk. It's about the dog. Lena's heart thudded against her ribs. The dog. Her gaze skimmed the small creature, still asleep, still oblivious. Another silence. Then, I know you're scared. The voice wasn't threatening. If anything, it was patient. But if you don't open this door, it's only going to get worse. Lena's fists clenched. This could be a trap, or it might be the only chance she has at answers. She inhaled shakily and opened the kitchen drawer. She gripped the handles of a paring knife. Not a lot, but better than nothing. Then she stepped forward, her heart pounding. Her hand stopped short of the lock. One last deep breath. click. She twisted the knob and yanked the door open. The man in the dimly lit hall was not the man she was expecting. Tall, late 40s, wearing old, dark, plain clothes, sensible, but nothing to mark. His expression was calm, not threatening, but his eyes said otherwise. These were not the eyes of a man who wandered into this mess. They were the eyes of a person who had been watching. For a long time, without giving Lena room to speak, he reached slowly into the pocket of his coat, ensuring she could witness the whole process. He pulled out a photograph and handed it to her. Lena tentatively accepted it, her fingers grazing the frayed edges. She glanced down, and what she saw took the breath from her lungs. It was her, far younger than she is now, no more than 10 years old, and beside her, her childhood stray dog, the one with the same mark. Lena's vision blurred as her brain struggled to comprehend the impossible. This picture was proof, evidence that someone had been watching her all her life. Her hands shook. She gradually lifted her gaze back toward the man standing in her doorway. He spoke in a firm tone, although his expression was calm. "You were never meant to find him." Lena caught her breath in her throat, staring at the old photograph in her trembling hands. Her, as a child. And next to her, the same dog from way before, the one with the mysterious mark. She looked up to see the stranger standing in her doorway. Her voice emerged almost in a whisper. Who are you?" The man let out a breath, looking down the hallway as if ensuring no one else was listening. Then he walked inside, shutting the door behind him. Lena stiffened. "Hey, I'm not here to hurt you," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "But if you're looking for answers, you've got to listen, and we don't have much time." Lena clenched her fists. All her instincts told her not to trust him. But at this point, she was too invested to walk away. She needed to know the truth. "Talk," she demanded. The man's gaze shifted to the small puppy still curled up on the bed. His face hardened. "So, they found another one." Lena's stomach twisted. "Another one?" She swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" The man paused, then eventually replied, "That dog is not like the others." Lena forced out a breathless laugh, but there was no joke in it. "Yeah, I learned that when the vet said its DNA doesn't match any known breed." The man nodded. "Because it's not meant to." Lena's pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "Have you heard of Project Orion at all?" Lena frowned. "No." The man's jaw tightened. "Of course not. They erased everything, every file, every report, everyone who knew too much." Lena tightened her fingers around the photograph. "Start making sense now." The man ran a hand through his hair as if he was weighing how much to share with her. Not until he gazed at her, really gazed at her, and something changed in his expression. "But you were never meant to remember," he muttered. Lena's blood ran cold. "What?" The man exhaled. "A classified research project existed years ago. It had to do with genetic anomalies in animals, but not just any animals. Animals that exhibited signs of something more than normal biology. Different creatures. Creatures that weren't supposed to exist." Lena's breath hitched. The puppy stirred, giving a soft whimper in its sleep. The man's eyes darkened. "That mark, it's not only a birthmark, it's a signature, a genetic imprint, a sign that this creature is one of them." Lena ushered as the room tilted. "One of what?" The man hesitated, then uttered two words that made her stomach drop. "The orphans." Lena blinked. "What?" The man pointed to the sleeping puppy. "They called them orphans, because they hadn't found anywhere to belong, not in science, not in nature, not in this world. Lena's mind reeled. She stared again at the photograph. The dog from her past. The same mark. She felt sick. Why? Why would somebody create animals like this? She said, her voice scarcely controlled. They didn't create them, the man corrected. They found them. Lena's chest tightened. Found them? Where? The man hesitated. His next words came out low. No one knows. Or, if they did, they never lived to tell about it. Lena's skin prickled. She recalled the black SUV that had been following her. The phone call. "They're watching me," she gasped, barely clinging to her voice. The man's face was grim. "They don't want you to ask questions, and they sure as hell don't want you keeping that dog." Lena's heart pounded. "So what happens now?" The man sighed and rubbed his face. "Now? Now you have two choices." Lena swallowed hard. "You can unlearn everything," he continued. "Just pretend you never discovered that new puppy. Just turn it in and leave it to them. Just walk away and enjoy your life." Lena gazed at the tiny, sleeping creature. It was helpless, innocent. And yet people were willing to kill to keep its existence secret. The pitch of the man's voice dropped. "Or you can run." Lena's throat went dry. "Run?" The man nodded. "Because the second they know you're not backing down, they'll be after you. And this time they won't simply be spectators." A thick hush filled the room. Lena's mind raced. It was effortless. All her instincts screamed to do something, to hand the puppy over, to walk away from it all, and simply forget. But she felt something deeper in her gut. This was about more than just a mystery. This was about her past, her life, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about who she was as a person. Her fingers grazed the puppy's fur. It released a gentle sigh, sinking further into the blanket. Lena exhaled slowly. Then she looked up, and she made her choice. Lena's heart raced when her gaze met with the man in her apartment. She had a choice to make, but she already, deep down, knew what she was going to do. She had no intention of giving up this puppy. No way she was letting the truth walk out the door. She drew a slow breath and steeled herself. "I'm not giving him up," she said defiantly, looking at the little being curled up on her bed. "I don't care who these individuals are. If they wanted him out, there's a reason, and I have to know what it is." The man sighed. He had been expecting this. "Then we need to leave, now." Lena's pulse spiked. "Leave? Where?" The man looked in the direction of the window. "Somewhere safe." Lena shook her head. "I'm not just going to run for the sake of running. I need answers." The man faced her again, his eyes piercing. "You don't get it, do you?" He leaned closer, speaking in hushed tones. "The instant you brought that puppy home, you put yourself on a list. You are a liability. They don't question other people. They don't negotiate. They eliminate issues before they grow." Lena swallowed hard. "So what? They'll just... What? Make me disappear?" The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was enough. Lena's stomach twisted. She had been so focused on the mystery, so intent on drawing out the truth, that she hadn't stopped to think about what the truth might cost her. She felt sick. She ran her hands through her hair, her hands shaking. "This is insane." The man exhaled sharply. "You have no idea." Then, a noise. A loud mechanical clank from the hallway. Both of them froze. Lena's breath hitched. The man's eyes darkened. He seized her wrist and pulled her toward him. "Get down!" Before Lena could react, crash! They kicked in the door of her apartment. A dark shadow filled the doorway. Tall, armed, face covered by a dark, tactical mask, Lena's blood ran cold. She had no time to process what was happening before the man next to her pushed her toward the ground. "Stay down!" he hissed. The next few moments were pandemonium. A flash of movement, a gun raised. Then, the stranger next to her was quick as lightning. Lena saw it only barely happen. He lunged, snatching the attacker's wrist, twisting it into an unnatural angle. There was a sickening crack that echoed throughout the apartment. The black-masked figure let out a moan of pain. With that, the weapon tumbled to the floor. The instincts kicked in for Lena. Run! She rushed to the bed, picked up the puppy and held it tight against her chest. The man turned to her then, his face wild. "Move!" Lena bolted. She dove for the fire escape and bungled the window latch. Her hands were shaking. The puppy whimpered in her arms, picking up on her fear. "Hurry! Hurry!" Behind her, another crash. The second attacker had entered the apartment. Lena risked a glance back, and what she saw made her stomach sink. This wasn't just some thug. This was military, black tactical gear, no insignia, no identification, and these weren't just people at random trying to scare her off. They were professionals. She glanced back at the window. It finally slid open. She pulled herself through without thinking, the cold fire escape metal biting into the palms of her hands. She didn't stop, didn't think. She just ran. The puppy clung to her as she staggered down the stairs, her breath coming in jagged gasps. Footsteps pounded behind her. They were coming after her. She had barely rounded the alley when she heard the voice of the man from her apartment. "Lena, this way!" She didn't hesitate. She ran up to him, her heart pounding. A black car was waiting. The doors were already open. As soon as she hit it, she jumped into the car, holding on to the puppy for dear life. With that, the man hopped into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind him. Then, tires screeched. The car responded and shot off into the night. Lena's chest heaved. The man turned, his voice trembling. "Who the hell are they?" He tightened his grip on the wheel. "The people who will do anything to make sure you never learn the truth." Lena's hands shivered as she gazed down at the small link of bone and flesh in her arms. This was no ordinary dog. And now, she was no longer simply seeking answers. She was running for her life. They tore through the darkened, hollow streets, weaving through back roads and alleys like a spirit gliding in and out of the interference of the world. Lena was in the passenger seat, clutching the tiny puppy, her breath uneven from the chase. Her mind was racing. Too fast, too much. Just minutes earlier, her apartment had been a war zone. Gunmen in tactical gear, no insignia, no faces, no names. Not just criminals, operatives. Trained to hunt, to kill, without a trace. And now, she was on the run from people who had wiped others clean before her. The man next to her, who was gripping the wheel like it was a matter of life and death, was still a riddle. Lena looked at him, her voice trembling. "Where are we going?" His jaw tightened. "Somewhere safe." Lena laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. Right, because of course, there's such a thing as safe. When military-grade assassins are hunting me, the man didn't answer. Instead, he slammed his foot down harder on the gas. Lena swallowed. "You never told me your name." A beat of silence. Then, "Cole?" Lena eyed him warily. "That your real name?" A phantom of a smile curled at the corner of his lips. "As far as you're concerned?" Lena scowled. "Great. Love the trust." Cole didn't react. His gaze stayed fixed on the road. Something about him felt off. Not in a dangerous way. At least not the same dangerous way the men who stormed her apartment were. Number Cole just didn't seem like a threat. He wouldn't have known this about him. He felt like a man who knew too much. And that, in some respects, was worse. Lena held the puppy tighter. It moved slightly but stayed asleep, its small body warm against her arms. She sighed to soothe her nerves. This dog, why is it so important? Cole didn't look away from the road, because it's proof. Lena frowned. Proof of what? A sullen Cole finally looked at her. That the people chasing you, they've been deceiving the world for a very, very long time. Lena's stomach twisted. Before she could push him for more, Cole out of nowhere veered from the main road, tires screeching as he rounded an unmarked dirt path. The car hopped across bumpy ground, sending up dust. Lena's fingers gripped the seat. What the hell? Almost there, Cole said under his breath. The trees were thickening around them, but the headlights showed little more than curled, gnarly branches and a jagged, uneven path ahead. A cold prickle at the back of Lena's neck. This place felt wrong, like a place no one was supposed to discover. Eventually, after what seemed like forever, the car jerked to a halt. Silence. Cole killed the engine. Lena's pulse pounded. She looked up. A cabin, or what was left of one. It was old, ancient even. The wooden planks were cracked and rotting, the windows boarded up, vines climbing the walls. No one had lived here in decades. Suspicion surfaced in Lena's voice as she stepped closer to Cole. "This is your safe house?" Cole unbuckled his seatbelt. "Seems abandoned, doesn't it?" Lena hesitated. "It is abandoned." Cole smirked. "That's what they are supposed to be thinking." He opened the door and stepped outside. Lena exhaled sharply. She looked down at the tiny puppy, who, at last, was stirring. Its dark, soulful eyes blinked up at her, utterly oblivious to the turbulence around them. She sighed. "Well, I guess we're doing this," she said. She got out of the car. The night air was still. Too still. Cole approached the door and crouched down, pushing aside what seemed to be a loose wooden panel. Lena raised an eyebrow. Then, click. A hidden lock released. The door swung open. Lena's breath caught, because inside, this was not an abandoned cabin. It was a whole different kettle of fish. Dim red lights pulsed above in rhythm. Walls draped in maps, documents, surveillance photos. There's a table in the middle piled with old case files, handwritten notes, and Lena's heart stopped. There was a photo of her pinned to the farthest wall, yellowed with age. Number not just her as a child, in the exact same spot as the old photo Cole had given her. Same clothes, same angle, but this one was different. Because this time, the dog in the photo, it wasn't her childhood stray, it was the puppy in her arms. Lena's stomach dropped. This isn't possible," she whispered. Cole sidled up next to her, voice low. "That's what I thought, too." Lena faced him, her voice quaking. "How? This image, this can't be real. This dog wasn't even born yet." Cole's expression was grim. "I told you." He glanced down at the small creature in Lena's arms. "This isn't just a dog." Lena's hands tightened. This was something else. Something she was never meant to discover. And now, she wasn't sure she was ready to find out what it really was. Lena's grip on the photograph tightened, her breath coming in short, uneven puffs. She held her gaze on the impossible image on the wall, the same childhood photo. Except this time, it wasn't the dog she recalled standing next to her. It was the puppy in her arms. The same eyes, the same mark, the same presence. Lena's stomach dropped. "This can't be," she whispered. Cole let out an exasperated sigh next to her and ran a hand through his hair. "That's what I thought too." Lena looked at him, voice sharp. "You knew about this." Cole's face was inscrutable. Not everything, Not until now. It felt like Lena couldn't breathe. And all at once, her whole life, everything she thought she remembered, everything she thought was true, was melting down. "How?" she whispered. "How is this possible?" Cole exhaled slowly. "There's something you have to see." He walked to the other side of the room and grabbed a metal box from the wooden table. The moment he cracked it open, Lena's heart leapt. Inside were documents. Not just any documents, classified records. At the top, stamped in bold red ink, Project Orion, terminated. Lena's breath caught. Cole retrieved a sizable dossier and thumbed it open, revealing a long list of names. She scanned them quickly. Most she didn't recognize, but then her own name, Lena Carter. Her vision blurred. There was a classified document with her name on it. A document older than she was. She looked through the pages and her hands trembled. Medical records, psychological reports, surveillance logs. She felt sick. They had been tracking her since she was a little girl. She compelled herself to turn to another page. More reports, more data, and then her stomach dropped, because on the final page there was an entry in the log. Date: June 12, 1999. Subject number 204. Recovery successful sample moved to primary test site, and attached to it, a photograph. Not of her, not of the dog, but of something else. Something lying in a cryo chamber, tubes snaking across its small, fragile body. Her hands shook. This is all a mistake," she stammered. But even as she said it, she knew it was not. Because she remembered. A flicker of memory. A feeling lodged deep in her head, clawing its way up. The farm. That summer, she stayed with her grandparents, the dog she discovered in the woods. Unfortunately, she had assumed it was simply a stray. But it wasn't. And neither was this puppy. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room for Lena. She glanced at Cole, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" Cole hesitated. Then finally, he looked up and met her gaze. "It's not just an animal, that dog. It's a biological anomaly, a living anomaly. It's not subject to the same laws that govern everything else. And if what you're seeing is real, it's been tracking you your whole life." Lena's chest tightened. Number not following. Waiting. Whenever she looked at the small, innocent creature snuggled in her arms. The one that ought not even be there. She exhaled sharply. Her entire life, every single moment she thought was real, had been manipulated by something greater than her. And now, she had a decision to make. Run, or fight back. And for the first time ever, she knew what she was going to do. She was done running. Her eyes blazing with determination, she faced Cole. "What do we do now?" Cole's gaze darkened. "We end this." The air inside the safe house was thick with tension. Lena stood motionless, the classified files still gripped in her trembling hands. The truth was right in front of her, spelled out in ink and faded photographs. The dog, the small, fragile creature in her arms, was never just a dog. It had been a part of a secret project, one that had started long before she was born. She turned to Cole, her voice quiet. "What's the end game here?" Cole exhaled, rubbing his face. "The people after us, they don't just want the dog, they want to erase everything. Every file, every trace, every person who's ever known the truth." Lena's throat tightened. "Including us," Cole nodded grimly. "Especially us." A heavy silence settled between them. Then a sound, a low vibration. It wasn't coming from the outside, it was coming from inside the room. Lena's pulse spiked. What was that? Cole's eyes narrowed. He spun toward the table, scanning the files. Then he saw it, a blinking red light. hidden inside the metal box. Cole's face dropped, a tracker. Before he could react, the entire cabin shook. A deafening explosion rattled the walls, sending dust and splinters raining from the ceiling. Lena staggered backward, coughing. "They found us!" Cole grabbed her wrist, his grip tight. "We need to move. Now!" Lena held the puppy closer, her mind racing. No time. No choices. They bolted toward the back exit just as a second explosion tore through the front of the cabin, sending fire and debris into the night. Lena's ears rang, her lungs burned with smoke. They stumbled out into the forest, but they weren't alone. Figures emerged from the darkness. Armed, tactical gear, the same ghost soldiers who had stormed her apartment. One of them stepped forward, his rifle raised. His voice was cold, empty. "You shouldn't have run." Lena's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The end. She clutched the puppy tighter, her body tensing for the inevitable. Then, it happened. The puppy stirred in her arms. But this time, something was different. A low hum filled the air. Not from the forest, not from the soldiers, from the dog. Lena felt it vibrate against her chest, a deep, pulsing energy. The soldiers hesitated, shifting uneasily. Then, the mark on the puppy's side began to glow, a soft, pulsing blue light. Lena's heart stopped. "What the hell?" one of the soldiers whispered. And then, the light exploded outward. A shock wave ripped through the clearing, knocking everyone off their feet. Lena hit the ground hard, her vision blurring. The air was charged. The atmosphere itself felt wrong. She forced her eyes open, and what she saw was impossible. The soldiers were frozen in place, not just frozen, suspended, like time had stopped around them. Cole was still moving, groaning as he pushed himself up. Lena stared down at the puppy. It sat calmly, its eyes dark and unreadable. The mark on its body was still glowing, and suddenly, Lena understood. This wasn't an experiment. This wasn't just some mutation. This was something else entirely. Something that had existed outside of time. Something that had been waiting for her. Her breath trembled. It wasn't just the dog that was special. It was her. This wasn't a random accident. She had been connected to this thing since childhood. She had been chosen. And now she had a choice. The puppy blinked up at her, its glowing mark fading. And suddenly, the soldiers began to move again. Lena had seconds. She looked at Cole, then back at the soldiers, then down at the creature in her arms. And she made her choice. She ran.